The unified Kingdom of Italy was still relatively young by the turn of the 20th century, having only been proclaimed on March 17, 1861. The first united Italian navy was comprised of disparate units from the former kingdoms of Naples and Sicily, the Kingdom of Sardinia, the Duchy of Savoy, Grand Duchy of Milan, and the Papal States. In those early years of unification, the two biggest enemies of the new Italian state were France and Austria. The Italians quickly built a fleet that was both large and highly mobile. Even so, the newly formed state of Italy would suffer a crushing defeat to the Austrians in the naval battle of Lissa of 1866. This set back the Italian navy for a while, but the Italians were hell-bent on avenging the Battle of Lissa and kept investing in expanding the Regia Marina in the latter part of the 19th century. This ongoing naval expansion meant that by 1913, the naval budget accounted for 37.4% of Italy's military expenditure. It was the largest proportion spent on the navy among any of the larger continental countries. The Italians had built some very good classes of ships in the years leading up to the First World War. In fact, some of them were cutting edge by the technological standards of the time. For example, the Regina Elena class of 1904 was the last class of Italian pre-dreadnought battleships and were dubbed semi-dreadnoughts. They were large armored cruisers with a displacement of over 14,000 tons and each armed with 12 8-inch or 203 millimeter guns. They were also fast, able to attain speeds of 22 knots, equating to 25 miles or 41 kilometers per hour, which was significantly quicker than contemporary ships from other countries. 4 of this class were built and named the Regina Elena, Roma, Vittorio Emanuele, and Napoli. They were designed by Vittorio Cuniberti, a leading Italian naval engineer and the man that envisaged the so-called big gun battleship. His vision was nothing less than a colossus of the seas. This pre-dreadnought class of Italian ships was so admired by the British Admiralty that it deeply influenced Lord John Fisher, the British Admiral of the fleet. It was he that pushed the Admiralty to commence on the famed HMS Dreadnought, wanting Britain to be the first in that class. The Italians didn't stop innovating in those pre-war years. They followed up with their own dreadnought battleship, which was named the Dante Alighieri in homage to Italy's famous medieval poet. Built between 1909 and 1913, Dante Alighieri would have triple turrets, itself a world first. More importantly, she was considered the world's most powerful battleship when launched. So, what would the Regia Marina achieve during the First World War? By the start of war, the Regia Marina was comprised of 5 dreadnoughts, 9 pre-dreadnoughts, 8 armored cruisers, 6 scout cruisers, and 35 destroyers. Italy also had 18 submarines at its disposal, although this would grow to 68 submarines being in operational use during the war, including WS and H type submarines from Britain and Canada. Italy's fleet of submarines was far smaller than those of the British or US navies, not to mention Germany's legendary U-boat fleet. Nevertheless, Italian submarines did have notable features, including the Laurenti double-hull construction scheme, which was heavily copied by other navies. In fact, the Royal Navy bought a few Italian subs precisely to study this innovative submarine hull construction. Italy could further count on 21 mine destroyers, 42 auxiliary cruisers or armored steamers, 6 armed yachts, as well as a large number of monitors. It also had 1 seaplane carrier called Europa. It was in light vessels that the Italians excelled, including its coastal bombardment gunboats. But it was its fleet of MAS torpedo boats, with MAS standing for Motoscafi Anti-Sommergibili, that were the true workhorses and gem of the Regia Marina. They were cheap to produce and of light construction, making them devilishly quick in the water. And there were many of them, with a total of 422 of these torpedo boats during the war. Austrian naval officers would often moan to their superiors in Vienna how the Adriatic was literally infested with these MAS torpedo boats. They were certainly the bane of the Austro-Hungarian fleet. Although the Italians were initially drawn to side with Germany at the beginning of the Great War, Italian admirals in particular were fervently against any such alliance. They argued that joining the Triple Alliance with Germany and Austria-Hungary would mean conflict with Britain's Royal Navy. The Italians were worried the superior British Navy would cut off all Italian seaborne trade in Mediterranean and hamper its links with its African colonies. Paolo Theon di Revel, the Italian chief of naval staff, was able to successfully lobby the Italian government in the late summer of 1914 to not enter the First World War on Germany's side. The Italian Royal Navy, or Regia Marina as it was called in Italian, thus played a significant role in ensuring the Italians eventually sided with the British and French. This Italy did on May 24, 1915, when it first declared war on Austria-Hungary. It made sense, given that Austria-Hungary was an immediate neighbor with whom Italy had multiple territorial disputes, particularly in the Adriatic region, and it is to the Adriatic Sea that we next turn. By late 1914, the French fleet had successfully blocked the Austro-Hungarian Navy in the Adriatic Sea. They had done this by closing off the Otranto Strait, which is the entryway into the Adriatic. Even so, the Austrians were proving very deft at attacking and sinking French and British capital and merchant ships in the region. Much of this was being accomplished by Austria-Hungary's small but very effective fleet of submarines. Remember, Italy only joined the war months later in May 1915. It would soon become clear that sending large warships into the Adriatic was suicidal for the Italians, as it would be for the Austro-Hungarians. The Italians quickly learned their lesson when two of its armored cruisers, the Amalfi and the Garibaldi, were torpedoed in July 1915, courtesy of German U-boats. That was followed by the sinking of the battleship Brünn in September 1915, which was caused by enemy sabotage. In the meantime, the Austrians had been pounding Italian ports along the Adriatic, rendering the Regia Marina unable to initially function properly. The Italian Admiralty under the leadership of Paolo Theon di Revel decided to concentrate instead on what he termed guerriglia marittima, or naval guerrilla warfare. This would be done in the form of stealth attacks and raids against both the capital and merchant shipping of the enemy. This guerriglia marittima would be accomplished by light forces, such as destroyers and, in particular, the many MAS torpedo boats in Italy's fleet. These raids and skirmishes would in turn be backed up by naval aircraft, which were coming into their own with the onset of the First World War. It was a war of attrition. The Austro-Hungarians had no choice but to fight back in the same way, and the Italians were particularly good at it. The Italians did suffer two significant losses by the end of 1916. The Leonardo da Vinci, one of Italy's dreadnoughts, was sabotaged by enemy agents in August of that year, while the pre-dreadnought Regina Margherita sank after striking a mine in December. There would be a few later successes for the Regia Marina. This would include the sinking of the Austro-Hungarian pre-dreadnought Wien in December 1917, in most part due to a decisive incursion by MAS torpedo boats. MAS boats would again play their part in the 1918 sinking of the Austro-Hungarian dreadnought, the Szent István. However, Italy's greatest threat in the water was that of German U-boats. By 1917, U-boats had been so successful in sinking Italian and Entente merchant ships that there were serious food and raw material shortages in Italy. The scale of Italian losses was immense. By November 1918, 57.32% of Italy's merchant shipping had been lost, a percentage greater than that suffered by Britain or France. It shouldn't be surprising that Italy often threatened to withdraw from the war throughout 1917 and into 1918. What finally helped the Italians to at least overcome the Austrian submarine threat was the laying down of an anti-submarine barrier of nets in the Otranto Channel. This barrier, which was 66 kilometers or 41 miles in length, did prevent the transit of Austrian submarines into the Mediterranean. It also helped thwart German U-boats in the Adriatic region at least. In the end, the Italians, together with French and British assistance, did keep the Austro-Hungarian navy in check. The Italians were on the victorious side, of course, but at some cost to its navy. By war's end, the Regia Marina had lost 3 battleships, 2 armored cruisers, 1 light cruiser, 8 destroyers, 6 torpedo boats, 8 submarines, 2 monitors, 13 minesweepers, 15 MAS gunboats, and 11 other vessels. The efforts of the Regia Marina is summed up by the International Encyclopedia of the First World War with these words: Italy's war at sea reflected the more general trends of the naval warfare in the Great War, a stalemate that turned into a war of naval attrition, As in the trenches on the Western Front, there too was a war of grinding stalemate in the waters of the Adriatic.